Good evening, everyone. How are you? And if you briefly want to, in the chat, want to give us your name and where you're at this evening, and we will get started. My name is Nathan McAllister. I'm a history teacher in Topeka, Kansas, and with me is Kara Lee in California with the headset on. She's joining us from NASA. And she's muted. Or your sound working. No, we can't hear you, Kara Lee. But I do love those headphones. So tonight's just to give us.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, forget it. You can just listen to my family.
And we have people coming in from Texas and California, and tonight's conversation, and I think that's a point of emphasis. We want to make sure that this is a conversation. And all of the voices that are here today, the teachers that are with us today, and we'll get to introduction here in just a second, are experts in the field, and we're all going to have to come back in the fall with students that are going to want to talk about what's going on in the world today. And so that's why we've asked this amazing rock star group of teachers to come in and help us work through this and maybe give us some hints, tips, tricks, ideas. How can we give voice to our students and help them through all of this? Kara Lee, you want to hit the procedures?
Oh, yeah. So we're really excited that you're here, and we really want this to be a conversation. I've seen a lot of panels where, just people are talking, which is awesome. But we really wanted this to be a conversation with a diverse group of people. I think this moment is so heavy on people, and we just wanted to give, I've been attending a lot of webinars. Someone told me I was a webinar addict, but just the things I have come up with a lot of these historians is like having a place for conversation, to listen and to learn from each other, because I think there's so much power in that. And so this is what it is. And so appreciate all our rock stars coming here, and appreciate all of you guys showing up at this late hour. And so we're going to we just would like to have a conversation. If Nate and I don't have to say anything, we'll be really happy. Feel free to speak up. You can unmute yourself and speak up. You can write questions in the chat box, and we'll man the chat. If you want to raise your hand, hopefully it'll just flow however it can go. So we're just really happy you're here. If you just join, make sure you introduce yourself. And we recognize Zoom chats are challenging, so we all apologize if we happen to talk at the same time or something like that. So we just want this to be a really safe space. And if anything comes from this, Nate and I would be happy to host something else, have another panel, or just where do we go from here? So we just appreciate all of you coming here.
Okay, so we're going to get started, and this will be the last time you're going to hear from me, hopefully. And I'm just going to introduce a couple of our panelists, and they're just going to have a 1-minute share of how they're feeling about society in general and what's going on around the nation. So we will start with Keisha Rembert, who is a professor of teacher preparation in Chicago and is amazing social studies teacher, former middle school social studies teacher, and just lover of history and all things social studies. And Keisha, take it away for your 1-minute share.
Hi, so how I'm feeling. I am enraged and energized. And I know that those might seem like contradictory emotions, and really they are, but I'll say that I'm enraged that this awakening has taken a while, because I think, and I think that that's okay. So I think that if I'm talking like my kids, I've been told people what was up, and I didn't feel listened to. I'm energized in the fact that I think that there is room for light and understanding as a result of the events, and I'm hopeful that change is going to come.
Thank you. Next panelist is Sagi LeClaire from just down the street from me, Mayetta, Kansas. And she is a language and cultural program director with the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation here in Kansas. Sagi?
I'm happy to be here this evening. I guess I would say I feel relieved. I feel relieved that voices are finally being heard, voices that have been muted through oppression by both the government and by so many systems that are in play underneath the government. And I feel relieved. We're being heard finally. I think that this is going to lead to major change in not just the government. I think that it will hopefully lead to change in overall thinking and understanding of the American people. I feel hopeful now.
Thanks. This is Mark Westfall. He's from Minnesota, social studies teacher, and so much more. Take it away, Mark.
Hi, my name's Mark. I was telling a few people earlier that the George Floyd epicenter is only about 4 or 5 miles from my school in St. Paul. So this is definitely something that my kids are struggling with. When things like this happen, we usually see it away in a different city, in a different state. And so it's easy to get lost a couple of days later and not pay attention to it because there's new news breaking all around them at the local and the immediate. But this is happening right now in real life in their own neighborhoods. So for my students, it's kind of taking on a different meaning of what reality is, about what reality can be, about what reality hasn't been. And I'm nervous to the standpoint of it looks like we've got a movement started. But what happens if it fizzles out? What happens if it doesn't take root? I'm excited to see how passionate it is in that in the midst of everything else happening, it hasn't started to fizzle. So I'm kind of wrapped around in a whole bunch of different thoughts in my head that change every 15 minutes of every single day of how I'm feeling.
Thanks, Mark. And this is Megan Forbes, my coworker, social studies and English teacher and YouTuber and everything.
Hi, everybody. I've been just very, very angry and sad for months on end now, I feel like. I don't even know how long all of this has been going on. So I do feel like if I had to be physically teaching in the classroom right now, that would be really, really difficult. And so there is something about the fact that we are all at home right now and we can do so much of this like groundwork now before we go back to the classroom or the virtual classroom with our students. And one thing that is encouraging to me is that people have been writing the resources and the curriculum for this moment for years and years and years. We do not have to reinvent the wheel right now. There are people who have been shouting from the rooftops that we need to change for decades, and the resources are there. So that's something I think that we can talk about throughout the chat. But if someone is just starting to talk about this in 2020, that's not who we're listening to right now. There are people who have been talking about this for decades, and we need to get back to that. And I am going to introduce the next speaker is LaTanya Robinson, one of my dear friends who I met on YouTube. We both do Teacher YouTube, and she teaches 8th grade English and history in Southern California. How are you doing, LaTanya?
Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be a part of this group. I think the best way to describe how I'm feeling is I feel cautiously optimistic. I am optimistic in the sense that this is the first time that I've seen something like this happen, like a George Floyd situation, because this is not the first, where a diverse group of people, multiple countries have all like come together and have made it like abundantly clear that something has got to change. So that makes me feel very optimistic. I feel optimistic in that I feel like teachers that were not paying attention to my perspective or my experience in the social media world are now more open to hearing what I'm saying and kind of giving what I'm saying some value and worth that wasn't happening a month ago. But also the feeling of, do they understand how exhausting this could be? And when you are exhausted and you're tempted to just open up the textbook and go to chapter 4, and that's the easier route, are we going to fall back into that pattern, or are we going to have the stamina to kind of put in the work to continue to improve the things we need to improve in education so that we do have informed adults going into society. So while I feel good to see everybody come together, I'm just worried about what is it going to be like in December when we're all tired, so.
And LaTanya has a YouTube channel called Smarty Style, and she recently uploaded a video called Dear White Teachers. And so I know that she's been receiving a lot of messages that say, as a white teacher, what can I be doing right now to prepare to go back into the classroom? And she has addressed that thoroughly, so go find her video. We have another YouTuber with us who is also a teacher, teaches high school, government, and economics. We have Amanda Rodriguez. She has a YouTube channel where she talks about all things teaching. Amanda, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me. I've been going through a mix of like frustration, being hopeful, and then also feeling overwhelmed. I think every day is different depending on who I talk to and depending on how much someone knows or how aware certain people are about what's happening. And so there are times when I am just frustrated because, as you've mentioned, this is a conversation that people have been having for years. And then to speak to people who are educators or just people who are just living their life and some of the things that people say or just the lack of knowledge can get frustrating because there's just certain things where I think, you just give people credit for it. And it's like, I didn't think I needed to take it all the way back when it comes to explaining certain things. So that's where the frustration comes from. But also hopeful. My students, again, I teach seniors, so many of them have already gone out and protested. They're in it. Like they've been wanting to know how to be a part of change even before the George Floyd situation. They went and protested when it came to global warming. So they're already invested. And so I think it is hopeful to see that because it takes more than just educators, right? It takes even our kids to be able to receive the seed that we're planting and then want to go out and do something about it. So that's what makes me hopeful, but then also overwhelmed because I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to happen when we go back in September. And I am concerned. I'm concerned that some staff members are not going to be open to it. I'm concerned that some people just don't think that this is even a necessary conversation, even with everything that's happening. And so that is the combination of feelings for me.
And we also have with us today Eunice Cho, Hush Jensen, and my 4-year-old in the background. And Eunice and I used to teach together in California, and then she moved to New Jersey and taught high school history there, and now she's in New York City, and she is a curriculum writer and also a coach for teachers. And so I know she's been in the epicenter of the pandemic, and this has been a stressful time, and she's still working through. Hi, Eunice.
Hi, so I coach mainly first and second year teachers in the Bronx and write curriculum for a pretty large charter network based in Brooklyn. And I think over the course, and I live in Harlem, and I am Asian American. I look the way that I do, and I have lived out the pandemic here in Harlem, have been coaching teachers in the Bronx, working for this school network in Brooklyn. It's just kind of been, I've also felt like a range of emotions, and it goes anywhere from like really sad and overwhelmed and also very concerned because I coach a group of 36 teachers, and I think, and they range really like from all over the country in terms of privilege, in terms of demographics. I think like secondhand, thirdhand trauma is very real. And so many of my teachers feel very overwhelmed and sad. And they're also very young, and so it's kind of like holding all of those emotions. Like, what do we do about that? And how do I help them navigate? And, the Bronx has been every day it's something new that I hear. The Bronx has been very hard hit by the pandemic too. And on top of that, I mean, the demographics being what it is, I coach teachers who are mainly teaching children of color, mainly Black and brown children, and it has been very heart-wrenching and really hard in so many ways. And also but at the same time, I feel so hopeful too when I think about how on the network level, this this charter network that I write curriculum. I guess not anymore technically since we're done with it for the year, but we're thinking about like what kind of conversations we ought to be having, like the direction that we need to take the curriculum in. When we think about all of these things, I do, even sometimes even in the midst of extreme sadness and just overwhelm, I feel like if we do this right, something good can come out of it. And maybe we will be able to give both the children and teachers what they need, like trauma-informed practice come fall. But then at the same time, I find myself sometimes being a little cynical. Like my first year ever in the classroom, February 2012, was when Trayvon Martin was killed. And I distinctly remember that. And I think, oh my gosh, it's been so long. And I just kind of think sometimes about like where we have come and where we haven't gone since then. And so sometimes I find myself being a little bit like, oh, what's gonna come out of this conversation? It's at the end, like, of 6 months from now, a year from now, like, what is going to happen? Like, you can come talk to me whether we actually have XYZ type things. And so it's kind of like a sad note to end my 1-minute spiel, but just to say, I feel a range of emotions every single day, every single hour, possibly.
Thank you all for the introduction. And if we can open up right now, and if any of the guests want to ask questions or just entertain us with a thought, that would be great. Or we can give a prompt to our panelists as well. But I'd rather hear from the guests that are here.
Can I piggyback on something Eunice said really quick?
Absolutely.
So I think Eunice brought up something that's really important for us to think about as we return to school, and that's just the trauma. So students have experienced this trauma of COVID, and researchers out of Princeton have said that we are going to, as a nation, all be experiencing a degree of post-traumatic stress as a result of COVID. And now with the awakening of what has happened, I'll say, of what the United States has failed to reconcile, I think that is another form of trauma. And while I am really excited to see so many book clubs and all of those things being formed, I'm kind of nervous about sending students back into the arms of people who don't understand how to deal with their trauma, and who might be novice even in their understanding of what students are going through historically and presently. So I think we also need to just fortify ourselves and examine and interrogate our own beliefs before we even start to think about what we're going to do in the classroom.
Okay, so I can jump in here. There's a question that's been burning with me since we put this panel together, and I would like you all, if you can all jump in on this one. And if we went back next week or a month from now or whenever, what 1 or 2 things do you want to see happen in the upcoming school year? And I know somebody mentioned, I think it was LaTanya, about what happens in December when we get tired. Are we just going to flip the book open and do what we've always done and get back into the rut, so to speak, and do what's comfortable and easy? And honestly, I don't want us. I have this saying that we can't be water. Water takes the path of least resistance, and I think we need to do what's hard, what's difficult, and face this. So, what are 1 or 2 things that you would like to see happen?
Well, I'm just looking in, someone in the chat is asking specifically what they can do for students of color. And I just want to jump in because I feel like the video that I wrote just really provides like a basis of what to do. So there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of reading, a lot of informing, but the good news that I was trying to put in that video is that the first thing you need to do is just remember all your students, including your students of color, they are human beings. They are people that have feelings, that have emotions, that have experiences that you really have to listen to and take into account when you're interacting with them. So just like you want to be spoken to with a certain level of respect, and you want to feel like the person that's talking to you is listening to you and values you, they want to feel that. And so while I'm in this group with people that I think are more versed in like specific historical information, I think like my strength is just like, I'm very into like, let me get to know you as a kid. And I think for any student of color, what they feel like they've probably been lacking is not the grace of just listening to them. So even when they're upset, even when they've done something that you think they shouldn't have done, even when they're raising their voice, that is a way of them saying, I just want you to listen for a minute. Like, just listen to what I'm saying and think about what I'm saying, and kind of go from there. Like, I really feel like if you, like, step one is just like, stop looking at them as students or scores or numbers and look at them as your child. How would you want your child to be treated? If your child were upset, how would you talk to your child? And I think I was lucky enough to go to a school where that was, when I got my credential, we had to go to their house. We had to see their bedroom. We had to know where they slept. We had to talk to their parents to teach us that they're coming to school with all kinds of things, you know? And so I think just starting there and just starting at the basic point of, don't let the teacher they had last year come and tell you who they are and what they are. You got to take the time to get to know who they are, what they are, where they're coming from, to help you understand how to best serve them and how to best understand them. And I don't think that teachers are doing that as much as they need to, especially not with the kids that make them nervous, or especially not with the kids that are coming off as aggressive, or, you know. So that would be where I would say, like, start there, like, and not just start there, but keep that at the core of everything that you do, every conversation you have. You got to hold on to that all the time.
I could not agree more with that, LaTanya. And I also think, particularly for white teachers, I have also been getting this question a lot. A large chunk of the teachers that I coach are white, and they all happen to teach in the South Bronx. And so it is mainly Black children that they teach. And I think the thing that I've been telling them is, the thing is, our kids already know about racism and police brutality. Like, it is very much a part of their lived reality every single day. And it's take the time, to LaTanya's point, to not teach them, but to really listen to them. It's not our turn to be in control of the conversation. Even kids who are super young, like second grade, third grade, they are able to express their feelings and their thoughts. And so I think the idea is to be open to being wrong and to saying, like, thank you, and I hear you, when students share their experiences. Because I really truly believe that discomfort doesn't come from having an unpleasant talk with kids. And the thing that I have been working toward with all of the teachers that I work with is that we have to, like, decenter ourselves from the conversation and really center the kids and their experiences. And the discomfort, again, doesn't really come from having the like unpleasant conversation. It really comes from having to admit that this is a very much a part of our kids' lives that we have been allowed to ignore for so long, right? And I think the thing that we can do and have to do at this point is to admit it, face it, acknowledge it, move on, and then be better. And just really, like, acknowledge this, you know?
And to continue from what Eunice was talking about, I think a lot of us jump straight to, like, how do I address students of color? How do I talk to Black students? Without realizing that our identities that we bring into the classroom are hugely important. We're seeing over and over again that there is something to this interaction between white cops and Black men. We're seeing that there is something there that can be dangerous for Black men. And we have to take a look at the fact that so many of our teachers are white women, and so many of the students that we suspend and kick out are Black boys and Black girls, and that there is something there. And that as a white teacher, just because you're the majority doesn't mean that you are like neutral or just like invisible, like that your identity doesn't impact your classroom at all. So I did list LaTanya's video, and then I have a video about books that white teachers should read to really come to terms with your identity and how that impacts the students in your classroom, and that you are not just neutral. You have a identity, and that is going to impact how you interact with students.
Students are also part of communities. So I think when we talk about students, we can't ignore the communities in which they exist in. So Eunice talked about teaching in the Bronx, but having teachers that come in from the suburbs to teach students. And I think that's a big part of the problem, that teachers don't understand the communities and the lived experiences of students of color. So what I charge teachers to do is to really get to know that. I had teachers that didn't understand, well, this kid said that three of their relatives were sick. And I'm like, well, have you not heard that COVID is disproportionately impacting communities of color? And really they hadn't. They didn't, because that's not in their purview. They don't have, that's not where they have to live. And so I go back to, even before we step foot in the classroom, we have to examine and understand the communities. And how can we tap into that community and bring that community into our classroom instead of hiding from that community and viewing that community as part of the problem? I think we also need to look at our curriculums. So students have experienced this pain, right? But there are also going to be great victories. And I don't want teachers to go in there and talk only about the pain, because there are things that students need to see as victories and see themselves as victorious in that process too. And I think that that's critically important.
I want to add to that. I agree with the reviewing the curriculum. I mean, everybody here is an educator and knows that the history books don't always tell the whole truth. And I think that is a huge issue, because it belittles the contributions that people of color have made to this country and all over the world. And that is something we really need to look at and work towards changing. We need to be more inclusive. Let's not continue letting our history being told by only one point of view. It's time for a change.
Yeah, to piggyback off that a little bit, I'll come back to that thought, but one of the first things I thought I need to do when we start the school year is just make sure that it's not just regular curriculum all the time. We need to be able to take breaks from that curriculum, not just at the beginning of the year to get to know our kids, but throughout the year. And I think that piece is what's missing and has been missing for so long. In terms of the textbooks, I've tried not to use the textbooks for, I don't know, probably a decade or so, because they're so minuscule, they're so limited, they're so biased. They portray one, maybe two perspectives, and you get that token piece of information. With that said, I need to re-examine the way I provide curriculum to my students, because here I am going, hey, I'm not using that textbook anymore. Look, I brought you this new perspective. But I've got to acknowledge my own bias in there too. I picked that chunk of information for a certain reason. Why did I do that? Is it including everybody that it could? How can I include more? I think those are the challenges that teachers are going to be facing a lot. And not that we haven't in the past, but it's in the forefront now. And we need to be reaching out and finding out what are some additional stories that I might not have known. I think I'm a pretty read historian, and I look for different perspectives, but I absolutely know, as the 41-year-old white guy from Minnesota, I don't know everything. And that is extremely hard for a lot of teachers to want to admit that vulnerability. And then they will say that they feel overwhelmed because they don't know where to start. the first thing to do is just start. Read different things, talk to different people, understand that there are multiple perspectives, and then start to try to figure out, because you're not going to get everything weaved in that first week and then, great, I established my relationships, everything's perfect now for the rest of the year. It's going to take time, but that's important to tell the students too. We're working on it together. And for example, and I'll stop in just a moment, we do History Day in our school a lot. And one of the key elements of History Day is we don't really want to analyze a topic until it's been about 20 years old, because we don't get that long-term impact. Now, obviously in a current events class that shifts, but we're so used in that textbook or that unit lesson that everything that took place in a 5, 10, 20-year period is wrapped up so tightly, and then 2 days later you're moving on to a next lesson and everything worked perfectly, or, oh, we forgot about that. Students are really starting to see now that it does take time, and it's not always easy, and it's not always pretty. That's something we just need to acknowledge.
And I think we shouldn't underestimate students' ability to have those conversations, to handle those conversations. And I feel like, at least where I'm at, I'm in Southern California, there's such a hesitancy to discuss anything that could remotely get controversial, that teachers just don't do it. And so I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, it's good for me, it's good for the kids, so we're going to do it. And this is my first year teaching middle school, but I did it with third graders. When we talked about, I decided to talk about the civil rights movement during Black History Month, because I had enough talking about Martin Luther King in isolation and Rosa Parks. So I was trying to teach them like why they're so important. And even at an 8-year-old, like, they have very clear and defined ideas about what is right, what is wrong. They have life experiences depending on their family's background that relate to that, but we're not giving them the opportunity, because we don't want to say the wrong thing, or we're scared what's going to happen when the student says the wrong thing. And so I think we have to remember that the kids are, like Amanda said, they're ready for it, especially the older they get. But even at the younger ages, they're ready for it. And I know for me, connecting movements and things that have happened historically to things that need to happen in the present, or things that have not happened in the present, and just kind of making that connection for them, so that they don't just see this as a class where they're memorizing dates and people, and that's really all that history and social studies is to them, because that is really the way that we've been teaching it in my district. We haven't really engaged them into civic engagement, activism, like, what can you do when something is happening that you don't agree with? And that's a shift that I know I need to make. And then I would also say, with just starting with students of color, like, I think Keisha was saying, like, being aware of who you are in relation to the students helps. So I always tell white teachers, because I always get the Black student that the white teacher is having a problem with, and so it's, send them to Miss Robinson, she'll handle it. But all I'm doing is using who I am with that student. And so I happen to be in one of the communities that student is, so I just know, like, whereas this teacher might think that he's misbehaving, all I have to say is, boy, sit down. Because I know, like, I'm using who I am and who they are, and I'm connecting there. Now, am I talking like that to my white student? No, but I'm still using who I am in relationship to who they are, and I'm using that to connect. And I think if you're a white teacher and you walk in the room and let go of that fear of, like, well, I'm the white teacher, I don't want to acknowledge any sort of part of who I am, like, that's where the mistake is happening, and that's where that divide is. Because now that the student's not getting any part of who you are as a person, so you're just two individuals in a room that are never connecting. So just, being comfortable and knowing who you are and how that benefits you in your interactions with your students.
I would also like to add on to what LaTanya just said, because so in the past, this is maybe about 3 years ago, I think when you're a new teacher, you do exactly that. You find out information about other students. Oh, well, tell me, what is this kid like? And a lot of times we have these biases that maybe they just had a difficult relationship with that teacher, or maybe that teacher was frustrated or didn't take the time to really learn about that kid. And then you look in with these eyes of who they are. And I remember my husband, who's way wiser than I am, was telling me like, no, you need to have a conversation with these kids. You have to stop the curriculum and you just need to talk to them. And I think sometimes we're so scared of doing that, or maybe admin's gonna walk in and you're just like, I need to know how to turn it on, or if anybody walks in, this is what we were talking about, because it's like this fear of like who's watching. But those conversations are so important because you do learn so much about your students. They know so much more than we would ever think. I teach in Brooklyn. All of my students are Black and Brown students. And so it's interesting because when I've had those conversations, and this is what when Latoya was speaking, it reminded me that even if we go in knowing who we are, you also have to be prepared for your students to think that you are somebody else, and you have to be okay with that. And they may say things that offend you and their perception of what is happening, and you really have to remove like the personal feelings. And I know that sometimes that may just sound so obvious, but you don't really know how you're gonna feel until you start having the conversations. And I bring it up because I was having a conversation with a student, these two boys. One is Latino and another one is Black, and they were always getting in trouble. One was actually in and out of juvenile detention. And so that was the kid that everyone was like, be careful with him. And they were my favorite students because we just would talk and talk and talk. And they taught me so much about life. But I remember one of them saying, but you're white. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican. What do you mean? And they were like, no, you're white. And I didn't really understand, like they perceived me as white because of my skin color. And even though I felt like, no, I'm just like you, I had to then realize, no, my experiences, even though I am a Hispanic woman, my experiences are completely different from my students. And so just even being okay with, oh, okay, you view me differently because I look different than you. And I may walk in there like, no, guys, like we're the same. Tell me about your story, but we're not. And then when you start to have the conversations, it's like, oh no, we are different. I haven't experienced the things that they have. There is a clear difference between privilege and white passing and all of these things that come along with skin color. So I think that it is important to also just take a step back, and whatever is said in the classroom is not to get defensive. And I know this may sound like obvious, but I've been there where it's like, what? You think that of me? And it's like, you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with how they perceive you because you've created the space for the conversation, and you need to understand the way they view you, and ultimately it'll also help you and the way that you view them. So definitely the conversations are necessary, but I will say be prepared for what is said because it may not be what you want to hear, but those conversations are still, they have to happen.
I think also like decentering whiteness, and let me just identify what I'm talking about when I say that. So my mother grew up in the South, right? And grew up picking cotton, didn't get a chance to go to school for the first couple of months because that was the season in which her family picked cotton. My mother had to perform for the white gaze. So she learned, in order to be smart, to be conceived, to be perceived as smart, she had to assimilate. She had to speak in Shakespearean English. And actually, my mother was good about dropping a line of Shakespeare because she really believed, and it was proven to be true, that people saw her differently when she spoke that. So she could drop a line of Shakespeare, but still use the wisdom of Brer Rabbit to get what she needed. And yet that wasn't valued. So the oral history that her father passed down to her and the work ethic that she had from picking cotton and all of those things weren't valued. And that is what I mean by whiteness. So there's a standard of intelligence. If we even think about written composition, there's a standard of proper English. And when kids don't meet that standard, then we tend to label them and disregard them. And who created that standard, though? Who's to say that that is the standard of intelligence? And so I think we have to move beyond what we've been thinking of as intelligence and intellect, and really challenge ourselves to see, wait a minute, what have I been centering in my classroom? Have I really been thinking about the voice and the lived experience of these students as valuable? And that's what when I talk about going into the community and understanding the community, what is that community value? And then let me bring that into my classroom so that I can truly see the myriad of intelligence that exists in that classroom, instead of only having a standard that looks one way.
Just quickly, also just on the content side, for anybody who teaches like US history in particular, right now we have to be thinking about how we cannot teach the Boston Tea Party without having conversations about what happened this summer. We cannot teach about protests against the government and how the United States was formed without bringing in voices of what is happening today. Like absolutely all of our identities are important, and our relationships with students are important. And we also just need to be thinking about how we're going to lay the foundation for our content and not repeat the same like fables and fairy tales about the way that our nation was formed and the equality that we have preached for so long, because we're all history teachers and we know that that's not true. And we need to make sure that we are well prepared when we walk into our classrooms this fall with discussions based in history about protest.
And to that, I would say language really matters. Like the kind of words that we even choose to use when we are talking about our like American history really, really matters. Like when we choose to talk about Thomas Jefferson and his relationship with Sally Hemings a certain way, as opposed to calling it like rape, which is what it was, and being honest with our kids about what that was like. I was talking about this with someone, and someone was like, well, there's just words, right? Like, what is the difference between slavery and enslavement? But really, clearly it became like a really heated thing, and I like lost my temper multiple times. But if I'm being real, but I think that as history teachers, it behooves us to really think about even the kind of words that we use in front of our children.
If any of the
I have
guests,
like a Google Doc that I can drop in there where people can read the
Laurel, I think you're still here, aren't you? Yeah. You brought up a good point about state curriculums and standards, and do you want to just bring that up again, and how that's it's an issue, but I think at the same time it could be an opportunity.
We're not tested. We're not, at least in California. No one is testing us on these standards. Don't be afraid to talk about current events in your history class because of the standards. We are not tested, and it's a blessing in disguise. Do what you want.
Well, and I think that that's true to some extent. I think that it depends on what district you're in, for sure. I work for our county office, and I'm in a different role, but in my former district, it was a very quote unquote conservative district, and you were expected to teach the standards, and you were expected to follow the framework, and that was part of your evaluation process. So I think that, I agree with you, Megan, but I think that there are other considerations that have to kind of come into play there. And there was a lot in the chat about admin, and I think that there is so many different layers to it that I would hate to speak that I was an expert in anything, but I think this is an opportunity for us as history teachers to really open up that conversation and look in a different way. Unfortunately, because we're not tested, and there are some, at least in California, there are teachers that do feel like they can say or do anything, and they can create their own curriculum, whether it's accurate or not. Or they are living and dying by the textbook, which the textbook, like we were talking about earlier, Mark said, like, I didn't teach from my textbook for the most part, but it can also be, and I'm sure this is a bigger conversation than right now. Incredibly expensive for teachers as well, or they just don't know where to start and they don't know where those free materials are. So that professional development or not taking care of or being able to access that professional development if they're not getting release time. I mean, there's just so much. And I think that when I was working with our teachers and working as an instructional coach, being able to give them resources that the people just had no idea. Like Megan had put in the chat, there's some really great resources out there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I completely agree with Keisha that like we and everyone that actually has spoken, like we need to make sure that we're looking at ourselves and our relationships with our students and creating that foundation, so then we can talk about all of this, the good, the bad, the ugly, and really be okay with digging in and getting uncomfortable and sweating in front of the kids and letting them know that it's a safe space where they can come and talk to us as well.
I think the standards are our opportunity, actually. I think the standards give us an opportunity to, in our professional learning communities, whether that be in our schools or whether that be our Twitter followings, wherever that might be, an opportunity to look and say, okay, what other parts of this story are missing? What's absent? What do I need to add in order to further enrich my students so that they are better? Because by adding, I know that some people feel like addition is watering down, and I would say that additional perspectives are actually enhancing and making our students more critical thinkers and actually more humane as a result. So I really think that the standards don't have to be a hindrance. Actually, I think by zooming in on certain standards and illuminating the need to broaden our students' horizon, that we create better students and become better educators in the process.
I would agree, and I think we're at, and hopefully this is a byproduct of what's going on now, that teachers are starting to realize, like I've told my admin multiple times when they find out I have an Instagram account and YouTube, and they just kind of look like, what are you talking about? I'm like, look, there's a lot of information on those platforms. And I think maybe now people will start to realize there's, like Megan said, there's people that have been putting out stuff for a while. And I do agree that the standards, even the textbook, you can use it as long as you're like, okay, but I'm going to also add this on top of that. If you're looking to kind of protect yourself, because I can very easily show my principal, yes, I'm using the standards. This is a lesson from the textbook. I just happen to also add this to it or pose this question in addition to it. And I think that that is perfectly fine to do. And in some ways, you don't always, like I said in a different discussion, these discussions or these opportunities for learning and growth, they don't even always necessarily have to be a formalized lesson. It could just be that you say, today, we are going to talk as a class about this particular topic. And I think it's easy to bring things in that way as well. If it's related to, if it's something in the news and it's a current event, just creating 15 minutes to say, okay, we're going to have a community circle or a fishbowl discussion about this, just so that the conversation has space and opportunity. But and I think also teachers, I mean, I work with teachers who came into teaching at a very different time, and they're just having a hard time adjusting to, gone are the days where we're just making cute little projects and we're on the Apple unit and like everything is sweet and cute. Those days are kind of gone, and there's going to be teachers that adjust to that and then teachers that don't. But some of the stuff that I've done that other teachers saw as controversial, my response to them is, I'm just so convicted that what I'm doing is the right thing to do that I almost like dare someone to question me as to what I'm doing. Like I'm teaching history. I'm making the kids critically think. And so I think there does have to be a certain amount of bravery in your attempt to just say, I'm doing this because it's right. And then also at the end of the day, they don't need to know everything that you're doing in the classroom. If they don't ask me, then I'm not telling them. But no matter what I do, I know that it's grounded in something. It's not something I'm just pulling out of the sky. And so we do have to just kind of give ourselves credit for being professionals and being people that can make adequate and proper decisions for our students, for the good of our students, you know. And I think districts are now at a place where they may be forced to kind of, or if they're really trying to put out the message that, you know, they're now more welcome to the idea of inclusivity and Black Lives Matter and all that. Hopefully they'll be a little bit more open to those things.
One of the things that I've done in the classroom, especially around current events over the past several years, is simply just to broach the topic, put up an article or a news story, you know, 1 minute story, and just say, here's some Post-it notes. What are your thoughts? What did you see? Who did you not hear from? And then collect those. And oftentimes, I mean, in social studies, you can take darn near any current event and tie it to just about any historic time period that we have. That's a natural way for the students to be able to have voice when they don't want to raise their hand in the middle of class or be on that direct Zoom chat saying anything, but you still get to hear that voice and acknowledge what they're saying by what you bring up next. And let them know, guys, I'm going to look at these tonight. I'm going to look at them tomorrow night. I'm going to look into this a little bit more. We're going to either discuss it or we're going to tie it in with what your thoughts are. You can then look at those students and see the ones where you just connected from their Post-it note where they might not have ever raised their hand, but now there's that connection. So there's safe ways to get that student engagement. And in Minnesota, I'll acknowledge we're very lucky. We have an extremely strong teachers union in our state, possibly one of the best in the country. We do have a lot more protection as teachers to be able to broach these topics. And I'm lucky enough in our state standards too, we have historical inquiry as one of ours. So literally every single day, if an admin came in and said, why are you talking about George Floyd? Why are you talking about Ferguson? Why are you talking about this? I'm lucky enough to go, it's historical inquiry. This is what we do. We critically analyze, and then we can tie it back in. So I would stress to a lot of people, take a look at what your state standards are, because you probably do have something in there that you'll be able to use as your fallback if the worry is that admin or a parent is going to be questioning you. Because these kids do want to get these topics. They want to see how things relate. And it's powerful to see how similar movements either did transform and change, or we can use those same things and go, okay, we talked about Trayvon Martin 8 years ago. Do we really think we've seen a massive change in our country? Why? Why not? And so all these things can continue to piggyback if we're willing to have that conversation. The trickiest part, I think, is just allowing yourself to say, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to do this because it's for the benefit of the kids. And if I need to justify it, we'll worry about that later with admin or the school board or parents, and hopefully others will have my back. But you're going to find out in most instances, people do have your back. They want to see you advocating with and for your students.
And students are going to be the primary ones. So I met David, and I can't remember his last name, and you'll probably know, the student from Stoneman Douglas. And I was just so impressed with the activism of those students. And I just talked to him, David Hawk, thank you. Talked to David about like what happened in your classrooms that really was the proving ground for so many of the students from your school to become activists. And he said the space to have the conversation, and the space even having myriad perspectives, even coming from a school that isn't very culturally diverse. So David said, I could empathize with different people's perspectives because my teachers always brought those into the classroom. And so that was really powerful to me, that even as young children, we need to be teaching our students that this isn't for a grade. This is for life. Like David talked about his teachers even like having students get up and practice, like presenting, like if you were going to have a press conference, and how fortuitous that the teachers would do that, right? But if you were going to speak in front of people about this topic, what would you say? How would you formulate your argument? And getting students to see that activism is part of history's DNA and what we want to, ultimately want from them. This is bigger than our classrooms. It is about humanity. It's about civic engagement.
And we definitely can't forget those basics of history. Like one thing that I'm seeing right now is that the majority of adults that I'm seeing on like social media, for example, lack very basic understanding of historical concepts. Like they truly don't understand what slavery truly was. They truly don't understand Jim Crow. They truly don't understand like the backlash. They don't know that we had many Black senators immediately after slavery was abolished. They don't know like timelines. So it's fine to teach from your textbook and teach those standards as well, because our students absolutely need a strong foundation in just these timeline concepts and cause and event concepts, because many adults who are making decisions in our country right now lack a basic understanding of all of those things. So even as you're teaching that kind of stuff, that's activism too. That's empowering our students too, because we need a nation who understands our own history.
It's crazy that the way you just said that, we were one of the cities that had the Christopher Columbus statue toppled over last week. And I was putting up some information, and I had a lot of people on Twitter either private message me or directly and say, well, how do you know about that? Or this isn't rooted in that. And all I did is put in a link to, here's when the statue went up in 1931. Here's what it was. Here who was at the event. It's in the newspaper article. Don't take it all. You know, there's probably more perspectives with that too. And so to your point, the amount of adults who don't know how to actively search or aren't willing to actively search to find this information, which is there. And I'll be the first to admit, it can be extremely overwhelming, the wealth of information that's out there. But that lack of willingness to even try to find it there and automatically jump to a conclusion. That's one of the things I bring up with students a lot. And it's almost every single time followed up by, be better than adults. There are some amazing, great adults out there, absolutely. But be better than them. Be better than the worst ones. If we can do that and commit to it, then we're going to start making that change. So there's so many different levels of what you can do with the students. And I mean, it's also funny, every now and then in like our foundations class, we'll pull out the man on the street things where they're interviewing people from whatever topic you want. And the kids will immediately be like, oh man, they're so stupid. And so you're like, okay, well, what do you think the answer is? I don't know. All right, how do we figure that answer out? And then take that next 5 or 10 minutes and see, do you even know how to do a Google search? How do you know how to look at the sources that pop up and say, do you think this is reputable? Those are the things I think that start to build the foundation for our students. It doesn't always have to be the most in-depth topic, but we get the ball rolling, because later in the year, when we get to those in-depth topics, they're going to have an understanding of what they can do to find out more information and bring more to the table.
I think having those spaces, I found a lot of times those draw in the students that you might be struggling with, those students that are your behavior issues, those students that never participate, don't get any work turned in, because them doing those things might be in reaction to the perception they assume you have of them based on their previous experiences with other teachers. And, you know, I think this past year I had a student who I was convinced she was not going to utter one word to me the whole year. And she almost made it the whole year, never, ever spoke to me. And on, I think the 1st of February, I just decided, okay, we're going to have a fishbowl discussion. And I'm just going to start it by asking, should we have, or should we even celebrate Pride months? So it says Black History Month, there's a Black History Month, Asian Pacific Islander. Should we even be celebrating these months? If this is a country of inclusion, if this is supposed to be the melting pot, should we even be doing that? So kids could be speaking at any given time. You have to be in a chair and the rest have to like stay quiet. And so they had great conversation. And then I threw in because everyone was like, yes, we should celebrate Women's History. But then I threw in Pride Month just to see like what would happen, and said, for some people, that's a lifestyle choice. And so some people may not feel that way. And the girl that I never thought would speak to me or speak in class was running to that chair, because in that moment she realized, oh, there is a space here for me. My teacher is not X, Y. Like, it was an opportunity for her to see that whatever she thought I was, or who she thought I was not necessarily the case. And it just engages those students that you a lot of times might be struggling to get, because now they realize I have a voice, I have a place, I can speak. And you'll find a lot of times they're usually the most articulate kids in expressing their beliefs. They just have never been given the opportunity to just kind of express it in that format. So I agree. I think just giving them the opportunity and teaching them how to advocate and all of that is a huge piece that we need to focus on.
So if I think about this if I think about the work of equity and anti-racist education and just rethinking education, so it starts with our own belief and then our practice, and we've talked about those things, but I think the last step is really important too, and that's changing systems. So like, I think that's where the real change, and I think a lot of people express that even in their introduction, like, I'm scared that we're gonna lose the momentum, right? Like, this will fizzle out by December, I think Latanya said. Like, and I think that's a real fear for people. But I think when we attack systems, then we are asking that change be ever present. And so I'm thinking about going back to school and looking at like discipline, and how is discipline disparate, and how are teachers like looking at students that way, and what policies even within departments target certain students versus others. I was having a conversation with a teacher friend today who said she was a math teacher, and that one group of her students was told to get, I forgot the even name of the calculator, this expensive calculator, and another set of her students who are, another section who is Black and brown, were told, oh, you don't need that. And so looking at those little subtle things that are happening within our buildings and calling it out and talking about how harmful those are. Like, I'm really big on recruiting and retaining teachers of color, because I think that if we have a nation where 52% of our students are students of color, it impacts students to not see teachers who look like them. And so looking at just everything, looking at school funding, and I think that that's where we can sustain the momentum.
I totally agree with you on the disparate treatment of youth of color. And I think that if it's going to be hard to have those conversations with your peers that you work with every day, but to me, being silent is being complicit, and it's got to stop. And we have to find the courage to step up and say something, even in those hard situations.
Gabe, we're past our time. I know we said an hour. Are you going to kick us off? Is that what you're going to
I'll put it in for longer than an hour. I'm good. We can keep going as needed.
One of the things that, and Sagi and I have worked together on a lot of things, is on Native American voices in schools, and the history of with Native Americans in this country either falls into just a few little cups, and it rarely gets talked about in any depth. And I think one of the things that, and I can say this because I've had several of our children in class, giving students a voice in what they're researching or learning, especially in a history class. I know Mark was talking about National History Day. I think that's a fabulous opportunity for students to have that opportunity to have their own voice and direction of what they're learning, and advocating for a particular piece of history that may not have been talked about or learned in a typical history class. And I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed National History Day preparations, and what was really good, in my opinion, was you offering or putting out the question, putting the questions in their mind, like, well, this is what happened. What do you think? And then that allowed them to engage, and it required them to research before they were able to speak on the topic. They had to do the research. And so I thought that was good. And it was a way of bringing history that's not often spoke of to light. And I love National History Day, and I think it's a great opportunity for kids.
I will say I think there's one big flaw with National History Day, and I love the program beyond belief. The topics that the kids pick, which are so engaging, I haven't been able to find a way for them to really demonstrate their knowledge of these topics to all their peers without taking days upon days upon days. So you might have this beautiful project of the Minnesota Dakota and the Dakota War and the US War of 1862, but only a few students actually really spent the time and dove in and researched with it. So as much as I love the program, I still need to find ways to get this information back out to other students, how students are researching and presenting to each other. And I guess I've seen so many people talk about choice and student choice, and I do that in my classroom too, but I see it too oftentimes used as kind of an add-on or an extra credit opportunity. If you want to know about the Navajo code talkers in World War II, you can do some work here and maybe we'll get you some extra points, rather than infusing that aspect into the curriculum on a regular basis. And I know I'm guilty of that myself at times. In a World War II unit, I've got voices of women, voices of children, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Latinos in World War II. They have to choose at least 3 of those categories and do research. And some of it I provide and some they have to do on their own. So I feel like I'm starting to branch away from just the let's use it as an extra credit opportunity, but I know I'm not doing it perfect yet. I just know I need to do it better. I don't know how to perfectly do that yet. And again, that vulnerability that we show, I think, is critical, that we're not going to have the answers, and we do need to keep talking to other people to say, have you done anything similar? What have you done? What's worked? What hasn't? Can I piggyback off of that?
And Mark, giving ourselves permission not to be perfect, because I think that's the issue that we have as teachers, that we want it to be perfect. And I think perfect sometimes is paralyzing. So I think that when certain teachers hear even what you just said, that's like, oh my, I'm not even there. So if I'm not even there, I'm just paralyzed to the point where I don't even know where to start. So just thinking about like, no, we're never going to be perfect, but we can be inclusive and we can like hold each other accountable, and we need a network. We need a network that holds us accountable and holds us to high standards, and ask the question, have you thought about this? Or you haven't included this person, and or I know this person. So I think that's important too.
And Keisha, that's well said. And I think that's really our marching orders, is to go forth this year and do those very things. It's give students a voice, it's understand who they are, it's to listen, it's to support them in everything that they do. And it's going to be a tall order this year, no doubt. But it's one that we should all embrace, and all should relish in the fact that there is this opportunity. It seems to be, and hopefully it stays there. And Mark said that he wants to keep this going. I completely agree. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for giving us your voice. And hopefully, you know, in the months to come, you can connect with other teachers and keep the conversation going. There's no reason for this to end. I think it's something that's got to grow, not fizzle out. And let's keep the conversation going and make this school year an opportunity for change. I know it's going to be tough. It's already been. The end of this school year was weird. So let's make this school year the year of change, and let's make it the best it can be.
Nate, you're recording this. Are you also keeping an archive of the comments? I'm doing it very old school on my phone, and I'm seeing comments pop up, but I don't have all the insight that people were typing and the links and the suggestions that people were saying, and I'd love to know if we are saving a copy of that so I can look back too.
Well, the amazing Gabriel is taking care of all this for us. He's the angel that's floating above all of us and keeping all of us organized and keeping it going.
And I'll add everything to the Wakelet. I've added everything that I could get a link or find as we were talking. So I added all into the Wakelet, the link that I put there. And I just thank all of you for coming. And I truly believe we're better together. And I totally agree that perfect is paralyzing, and I get paralyzed a lot. Not that I'm perfect, and just we see that there's so many friendly, wonderful people out there, and I think we need to remember to reach out because we don't have to do it alone. We see what can happen. Amazing things can happen when people work together, and that's what we're seeing. And we're going to believe that it's going to continue on, and it's going to be better for everyone, especially our students. So thank you so much for coming. Thanks, Gabe, for hosting us. Thanks to all our panelists.